When people see the title of this video, you might think I'm talking about the decision to just not adapt the game at all. And no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about some really weird specific choice that this movie makes in the middle. So let's just hit the rewind button and assess how we got here. Much like many other people, I was a huge fan of the Until Dawn game when it came out in 2015. I was watching Let's Play after Let's Play of it on YouTube, and finally I was like, I want to play this for myself, and that is the sole reason I bought a PS4 back in the day, is so I could play Until Dawn, and I did, and I love it. And to this day, I do think Until Dawn is just one of the best pieces of horror media ever, especially in its character and storytelling. It's just, there's nothing like it, and it paved the way for a whole genre of video games. And of course, video games like that existed before, but Until Dawn made it sort of mainstream. And so when they announced that they were making an Until Dawn movie, I was pretty excited. Heck, I even made another video about it, predicting which character would live and die, and I think I did a pretty good job of that if they ever decided to adapt the game, because I thought they were going to adapt the story of the game. And then the trailer dropped, and that's when tragedy struck, you could say. I, much like everyone else, was in shock, awe, disbelief of how could they do this? Make an Until Dawn movie that has no similarities to the plot of the game. So I was very upset when the trailer dropped and outraged. How could they do this? This makes no sense. Why would they title this Until Dawn if it has nothing to do with the game? Just give it a different title and you can still release it, and I'm sure it would be fine, but why call it Until Dawn? And then as the weeks and months went by, I actually was warming up to the idea. As more trailers came out, I was like, you know what? This looks pretty good. Just horror movie wise, I'm still not sure why it's called Until Dawn, but you know what? It looks good. And then I attended WonderCon in Anaheim, to where they had a panel of the cast and director there, and I got to hear them talk about it, their experience shooting it, and all the actors sharing stories on set and how much fun they had, and they showed us like a sneak preview, and it looked really good, and that got me really hyped for it. I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm excited for this. And watching that panel made me realize, you know what? I'd rather have an Until Dawn movie that does not adapt to the story but is still good, rather than an Until Dawn movie that is trying to adapt the game and is bad. And so I was like, you know what? I'll take it. And just all the footage looked good, and I was excited. And sort of their defense to everything for not adapting the story of the game as well, we wanted to do, the time loop thing where decisions matter and you learn from your mistakes, and then, you can make better choices, sort of like a video game. And how that's not really how the game works anyway, but we'll get to that later. So going into the movie theater, I was very excited. In fact, I had a group of friends over before we went to see the movie. We all played the game together. We got through like about half the game before we had to go see the movie, just as a refresher on how good the game is. Then we went to see the movie, and I won't lie, the first part of the movie is pretty good. I was enjoying it. I was engaged, and here I guess we're now getting into spoiler territory. It's about a group of friends all in their 20s, which the Until Dawn video game is, those characters are teenagers, but they all look like they're in their 20s anyway, so welcome change, I guess, on that part. And then, so the one girl's trying to find her missing sister, and it's like, okay, we have a sister dynamic like Until Dawn, I guess. And then they arrive to the place where they think the sister went missing, and then a bunch of rain starts happening, and they're sort of just enclosed in this one area where they have the welcome center, which is the house. And then from there, they're hunted by a slasher masked killer, which the mask resembles the other mask from the game. And as they're hunted by this guy, they all die, and then they wake up again, and it's like, whoa, we died, but then the time reset, and now they sort of discover the time loop thing. And here's where they also throw in a reference to Happy Death Day. One of the characters says, oh, it's like that one time loop movie where they die and they wake up, and then another character goes, well, that happens in a lot of movies, you got to be more specific. And then that was a little cute, like, lampshady moment of how they're acknowledging that this premise has been done before. I guess now talking about it, this also applies to Edge of Tomorrow. That's another time loop where you die, it resets. Then the second night, I believe that's more of a ghost thing of one of the characters gets possessed. The character, I want to call her Emily because she is an Asian woman, but no, her name was Megan. And so she gets possessed, and she's like, oh, you're all gonna die. And then the main girl, Clover, which they say Clover like a million times in this movie, literally. I want to go through the movie again just to count how many times they said Clover, because it is comical. She like runs away, another house appears, and the old woman goes, you either survive or become part of the night. And then she's like, what? And then everyone dies again. And then about the third time is like, what? The third or fourth time is when they drink water, and then they have, I guess this is my only reason, is that David F. Sandberg just wanted to do a Ready or Not moment. He like watched Ready or Not and is like, I want to do that. And so they just have everyone explode because they drank the water. And then the next night, I think after the water, is when they discover the Dr. Hill thing and how Dr. Hill is behind all this. And Dr. Hill even radios into them and is like, this is my evil plan. And then they're like, we're gonna find a way to stop him, and how every night something new gets added to whatever we're doing. And so the first night it was the killer, the second night it was the ghost, and so on and so forth. And then I'm like, great, you know what, this may not be Until Dawn adaptation, but this is a cool premise for a movie where each time the group dies, a new monster gets added and they have to learn how to fight that one off as they try and survive the night. That's great. But then, in the most bizarre decision I've ever seen a movie really make, maybe that's hyperbolic, I don't know, they just skip ahead to the 13th night. Like, they all die that night on what, night 4 or 5 they die, and then when they wake up again, they're like, well, what night is it? And then they just go, night 13. And I was sitting there in the movie theater going, what? I like leaned forward a little bit. I was like, is this a prank can? Is this just a prank can? But no, they showed the book. They said, we've signed the book 13 times. This is our 13th night. This is our last life. And they don't remember a single thing about it. Because I thought the premise of the movie, the whole reason why you're not adapting the Until Dawn story and telling this one instead, is because it's a time loop where they can die and learn from their mistakes, like a video game would be. But now, if they're forgetting, they can't learn. So what was the point of there even being a time loop in the first place if they just wake up when they have one life left and don't remember a single thing? There's a cool part here where one character is like, wait, I have videos on my phone about what happened at previous nights, and then they do a little montage of scary things that were mostly in the trailer, of like the worm in the girl's face and more like jump scares, all shot through a first-person POV, which was fun. I think it would have been better if it was just like a regular montage, because I obviously, if you were gonna do the idea of not, them remembering everything and not skipping ahead multiple nights, I was like, okay, maybe around night 5 or 6 is where they're gonna have like a montage, and then it ends at like night 11 or 12 or 13, much like Happy Death Day does. There's a fun montage of her dying in silly kooky ways and fun music in the background, and I thought they were gonna do something similar, but no, they just have this like phone clip thing. And when they wake up on the 13th night, Megan is missing, and she's not there because they saw on her phone that Megan actually, in one of the nights, survived and went to follow Dr. Hill. My friends after the movie were pointing this out, that isn't that a bit of a plot hole there? Because even if one of them survives until dawn, then the whole thing ends. And in order for everything to reset, they all need to die. And so, but if Megan, that night when she followed Dr. Hill, she survived, then that would have ended the whole thing, and she would just have been the survivor. So maybe we assume that maybe once she followed Dr. Hill killed her, I guess, but that part just doesn't make any sense, and they don't explain it. So now on the 13th night, they have to go get Megan, kill Dr. Hill, and escape and survive until dawn. And here is where I will give it credit. The 13th night is the most accurate to the game. And by that, I mean they are fighting off Wendigos in a sanatorium, which is the closest we're going to get. They do fight the masked killer as well, because he's still out there. That part was cool, just the amount of gore that, David F. Sandberg wanted to show. Sure, it wasn't maybe excessive at points, sure, but, I enjoyed that. And I thought the Wendigos themselves were cool design. And I'll throw in, this only had a $15 million budget. And so the Wendigos and the special effects, the practical effects, the everything, and the set design and the practical sets, it all looked really good. For $15 million, it looked great. The really only problems I have is with the story. Because at this point, on the 13th night, they really are only fighting off that slasher guy and the Wendigos. The whole ghost possession thing from night 2 never brought up again. That old lady, no one ever gets possessed again. They had a whole thing on night 2 where Clover, her eyes go black and she gets possessed, and I was like, oh cool, this is her becoming part of the night, and now maybe she's going to become a villain, and now they'll have to kill her to snap her out of it, and all that stuff never gets brought up again. They're really only fighting off Wendigos and that one slasher, and that makes me wonder, why couldn't this movie have just been a group of teenagers or 20-year-olds just fighting off Wendigos for one night, and then they could still call it Until Dawn, because you know what, that's close enough. And throwing in a slasher might have been too much, because then, in the Until Dawn game, the slasher element ties into the greater story in a way, to where in the movie the slasher being there doesn't really do anything. Which I guess we'll talk about that part where Clover goes to see Dr. Hill, and Dr. Hill is like, this whole thing is powered by you, you're the engine, and your fears create the monsters. How everyone just has a fear of getting killed, so that's why the slasher is there. But then she's weird and has a fear of spontaneous combustion, and so that's why the water is there. And nothing else. The Wendigo are not her imagination, because the Wendigo are part of his experiment of just how if you stay in this time loop thing for long enough, you turn into a Wendigo, which isn't exactly how it works, because in the game it's a mining thing that a mine caved in and the miners turned to cannibalism, and then once you do cannibalism, then you become a Wendigo. And that's how in folklore it works as well. And so no cannibalism needed this time to turn into a Wendigo. You just have to stay here till 11 or 13 nights. Well, in the VHS tape he says 11, but in the actual movie it's 13, I guess. Now I sound like CinemaSins, but you get what I mean. And that was another part where they were like, oh, they're slowly losing their hair and growing teeth and having weird black veins in their forehead. And so you'd think as the nights go on, the more and more they turn into Wendigos. But on the last night, on the 13th night, they still look normal. They're still, I thought there was going to be more of a transformation thing. That one guy does have his back poking out a spine or whatever. But you'd think there would be a more drastic change between nights 4 and 13. But yeah, Clover being the engine for this whole thing, sure. But at that point, so here's where the movie, I guess, can just go in two separate ways. Either commit to Clover being the engine, and then all the fears start showing up in different ways each night, sure, and maybe one of those is a Wendigo. But now when you have multiple Wendigos, like everything else gets thrown aside. And so you can either commit to Clover having multiple different fears and they fight off the different fears, great, or go and just make it Wendigos and they kill the Wendigos, and that's the villain of the movie. But this way they want its cake and eat it too, and it was yeah. I will say, speaking of the Wendigos, there is one part where I was watching, I was like on the edge of my seat. I had a big smile on my face because I was like, yes, this is the game. And that's when Clover is making her way to Dr. Hill, and there's a stoplight, and it's blinking red, and so it'll go red and then black, red and then black, and then you can see a Wendigo get closer when the red light flashes, and then the Wendigo gets right up next to her face, does the scream thing. I was like, and she's standing still. She's got her little PlayStation controller and she's not moving. She's holding still, and I was like, yes, that is the video game. That is the spirit of the video game. That is taken directly from the video game. I love it. And it's not to say that I wanted like more Easter egg, like direct references to the game, because there are 2 of them. But just moments like this, of like moments of horror that's like taken from the game, especially with the Wendigos, and that one specific scene was done very well. And to that, I'll say all the horror scenes were done very well. I think David F. Sandberg knows how to direct horror. He was very good at building suspense when the music gets quiet and the camera's moving around and all that dead space. You don't know what's going to pop out from where. He did a great job directing the individual horror scenes. But again, it's just the story-wise of how those horror scenes all connect to each other. And then back to Clover and Dr. Hill, we see a little cameo of Josh Washington on his desk, because that's one of his patients. And then the end of the movie, it flashes, and on the TV monitors we see a car pull up to the Until Dawn game lodge, the Washington Lodge from the game. And I guess they're teasing a second movie that's probably not going to get made, to where they're doing the real story. But to that, I say, that doesn't, I mean, how are they going to do the game story now in the context of these movies? Of like, there's already a slasher character who dresses exactly the way Josh does and wears the same mask Josh does, spoilers for the video game. And so how are they gonna do that? And then now in the video game, if they adapt the video game in the second movie, then Dr. Hill needs to, 1, come back to life somehow, and 2, be the villain, when that's not how the story of the game goes. And then what are they gonna do, the time loop thing in that movie too? It's best probably just to ignore this whole movie ever existed and then adapt the video game if they ever were going to make another one. So that skip ahead to the 13th night was my biggest complaint about this entire movie. And, you know, here on the channel, I like to keep things positive. I don't like being too harsh. And again, these screenwriters do not have an easy task of adapting like an 8 or 9 hour long video game and, you know, condensing it into a 1.5 hour movie. And so on one hand, yeah, I think maybe it was smart of them to be like, you know, we're just not going to do the story. We're going to do a different thing that's somewhat adjacent to it. And, you know, during the WonderCon panel I saw, they talked about how they're like expanding the Until Dawn universe, which, yeah, sure, that's one way to put it, by just, you know, doing a different story altogether. And what I think what saddens me the most is that this is a really good concept for a horror movie. It's a time loop, but each time you die, a new villain gets added. And then so not only do you memorize the patterns of the old bad guys, but now you have to learn the patterns of the new one while you're trying to survive everything. I think that is genius. This is me editing, and I honestly realized that this is the plot of Night at the Museum. Like, the first night he has to learn how to deal with the T-Rex, and then the next night he learns to give the statue bubblegum, and the next night he's learning how to solve conflict with all the miniatures. And yeah, this is Night at the Museum, what I am describing. And it's kind of awesome. I'd love it. I would love to see that version of this movie, but unfortunately, that's just not what it is. I didn't even talk about the big, like, Golem Colossus thing that's there, that was in the trailer. I was so excited to see that in the movie because I was like, I wonder what that thing's gonna do. But no, the shot that's in the trailer is the only footage of that thing in the movie. That's all we get to see. Which also is really sad. And again, when I was talking with my friends after the movie, they had the cool idea of like, instead of just Clover's fears, what if it was everyone's fear? And like, each night a new person's fear got added, and so then it's more dynamic, and then you get to have more character moments of each character having to overcome their specific fear, which would have been great, because another thing I didn't really touch on is the characterization in this movie is also not the strongest. Clover has the most characterization of just, hey, I want to save my sister because I believe she's still alive and she can still be out there. And then later in the movie, she has to kill her sister, which should have been more of a emotional beat, but it just kind of wasn't. They tried it a little bit. It just didn't really pan out. There's Megan, who her one thing is that she's apparently psychic, I guess, and she can feel vibrations or whatever and know things, which I wasn't really sold on. I didn't like that part. And then there's Megan's ex, or not, no, Clover's ex, I forget, Max, I think. He's sort of just there to like win over Clover again and be like, I want to date again. And then they have the other couple of two characters who are dating, and the new guy, their guy is like new to the group, and so they don't really trust him, and he doesn't really trust them either, which I thought was a fun dynamic of like when they learned that in order to survive, they have to kill one person, and then so they're like, hey, is it going to be that guy because we know him the least? I wish there was more interpersonal conflict like that. The only real interpersonal conflict we got is people just disagreeing on course of action to take, of being like, well, we can't stay in one place, but then they're like, well, we can't like fight things either. We gotta go do something. And it was sort of all over the place. And again, another big disappointment is if you are doing a time loop thing where people are dying, make it so, again, much like the game, the butterfly effect, you remember people's actions, because on the first night when the slasher is running around, the slasher is killing, I want to keep saying Emily, he's killing Megan, and then Megan looks up to, I believe, Clover or the other girl who's holding a knife, and at this moment, they can intervene and stab the killer and save Megan, but they just stand there, and then they don't, and they do it too late, and to where everyone dies, and then when the next night rolls around, you'd expect Megan to be like, hey, why did you let me die? You could have intervened. You could have saved me, but you let me die, and now I'm mad at you. That doesn't happen. She does a little, like, step back, like, glance, like, dirty look at her, but that's all there is. And I just wish there was more moments like that throughout the entire movie if we're doing like the time loop thing. Just more like characters betraying each other, and because I think that would create a really interesting dynamic, because when you're watching a horror movie, just like a standard no time loop horror movie, most people sitting in the audience would just be like, oh, run, leave, go. If you have a chance to leave, just run away, like leave everyone else, get out of there and save yourself. But in this movie with a time loop, if a character does that, then if time resets, then everyone's going to be mad at that character for running away and leaving, which creates really interesting concept, and then flips sort of what the audience thinks on its head and is calling out the audience of like, hey, this person can't just leave. The way it's shot, the set design, how it looks, the acting, also not bad at all. I liked all these actors. Random Maya Mitchell jump scare, shout out to my my Disney Channel movie video. Yeah, it was just sort of going all over the place, and nothing really seemed to stick. I would assume maybe that there were multiple different versions of this script, and they all just sort of blended together into what we got now. So I don't think this is like an atrocious, abysmal thing that I know like some Letterboxd reviews are calling it like the worst movie to come out, and however, it's not that at all. I was actually watching it with a friend who never played the games before. She didn't know anything, and she was like, you know what, since I knew nothing of the game, it was fine. Like it was a fine horror movie. And so I am jealous of the people who have never played the game and obviously to those who have never played it, go please play it. It is one of the best horror stories out there. It's just one of the best stories told in that way. And I guess I'll end it with this I was thinking about it, and I don't think we need an Until Dawn movie, because the video game medium is the best way to tell that story, with all the different characters' perspectives, and taking its time, taking the 8, 9, 10 hours it takes to complete the story, because that's what the story needs, and the twists and turns, and to become invested in those characters. And so to shove that all into a movie, maybe even if you make it 2 hours, I don't think it would still be enough. And part of the game is that it's you making choices that impact everything, and to make it a linear movie where the audience has no choice sort of takes away from that as well. I know when it got announced that there was going to be an Until Dawn movie, some people theorized like, oh, what if it's like the Clue movie and different theaters play like different endings? I do think that would be cool. At the end of the day, I'm happy the game exists. I'm happy for what it is, that I can keep playing it over and over again, making new choices, getting new endings, and that the movie does not ruin the game for me in any way. And I'm happy that, they gave it a good shot. And again, not the worst thing in the world, but as a super fan like me, a little disappointing is all. But good news is, this summer, next month of May, looks like there's going to be some good horror stuff out there. Thank you for watching, and if you have not, go check out the other video I did on Until Dawn. Oh yeah, I got this poster for free at WonderCon. They had like a booth and they were giving out free posters. I did not pay for that.